Spider-Man No Way Home is finally out, which means it's time to rank all 11 Spider-Man movies from worst to best. Now, it should go without saying, there are spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home when it gets to that section. So if you haven't seen it yet, click out. I don't know why you're watching this video if you haven't seen it, but if you're watching it because you're curious, there are spoilers. So if you haven't seen No Way Home, click out now. Alright, coming in at last place at number 11 is Spider-Man 3. This is a case of having too many cooks in the kitchen and ruining the dish. There was the version of the film Sam Raimi wanted, which he swears was going to be the best Spider-Man movie ever, and the version the studio wanted, which is chock full of bad ideas. Now, it's hard to say whose are whose, so it's hard to know who to truly blame for what ideas were bad and what ideas were good, because I don't know, I wasn't there when they were making it. But the gist of it is, it has too many villains and plot lines, and some of the cringiest writing and scenes of any Spider-Man movie. They try to write Sandman to be sympathetic, but the way they do it is executed very poorly. They retcon who Uncle Ben's killer is, which completely destroys the whole point of Peter being Spider-Man in the first film. And Harry, who is supposed to be the big villain of this movie, is out of commission for most of it. And when we finally get Venom in this movie, it's very tacked on and very miscast. Venom was written to be a metaphor for drugs and drug abuse because that was a big topic that was going on around the time that villain was in the comics. So in the comics, Eddie Brock is this super jacked guy. Who do we get to play him in the movie? Topher Grace. Yeah, rumor says the actors all hated the script, but had to come back because they were under contract, and by golly, you can see why. Number 10, Amazing Spider-Man 2. Clearly, Sony did not learn their lesson about doing too much in one film, because many of the same problems that plagued Spider-Man 3 also plagued this film. Namely, too many villains and plot lines, because Sony wanted to make their own shared universe of Spider-Man characters to compete with the MCU, and they were trying to set up a Sinister Six movie, and so it feels very distracting. The villains of this film are also very poorly written. Electro's motivations are really dumb. They just jump onto Harry being the Goblin instead of taking the time to develop his friendship with Peter. They do in 3 minutes what Spider-Man did in 3 films, and it just feels very rushed. And then we also get the Rhino tacked on at the very, very end, and that storyline never even continued anyway. That being said, the relationship between Peter and Gwen is very well done, and it actually gives some weight when Gwen finally dies. Number 9, Amazing Spider-Man. The biggest problem with this movie is it's an origin story. Like, it doesn't need to be an origin story again. We don't need to see Uncle Ben die again.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
Also, while Andrew Garfield did a pretty good job in the second film, here he doesn't come off as awkward enough. He comes off a bit too confident. Like, I don't believe this guy's a social outcast. He's a little bit too confident. But he has better chemistry with Emma Stone than Tobey Maguire did with Kirsten Dunst. Number 8, Venom. Even though this isn't technically a Spider-Man movie, but I guess it kind of is now. We'll see. Anyway, I do find this movie fun, but it's not the best written. It doesn't have the best script to it. Now, Tom Hardy is pretty funny in this movie, and there are a lot of great scenes with him in Venom, but it doesn't really know what wants the tone of the film to be. It's a buddy comedy, and then it's a sci-fi horror, and a lot of the dialogue sounds honestly like it was written by an 8-year-old. Number 7, Venom, Let There Be Carnage. I thought this was a step above Venom. It takes what worked about the first film, which was the buddy comedy dynamic between Eddie and Venom, and it expands it. Woody Harrelson is great as Carnage. He's very creepy. However, I do feel he was a bit underdeveloped. I feel like they should have spent more time on him. The film's only like an hour and a half, so it's not that long, and I didn't really need the scene with Venom at the club. I didn't need as much of the Odd Couple homage in this as I got. That time could have been better spent on developing Carnage more. Number 6, Spider-Man Far From Home. I enjoyed this movie. It has a pretty good plot, but villains' motivations are kind of generic, and I could have done without some of the crasser humor and writing that makes it seem like it's trying to be a PG-13 version of the Deadpool movies. Number 5, Spider-Man from 2002. This is still a great movie, but in some aspects, it's a bit dated. For one, the fight choreography in it kind of feels like a Power Rangers episode, and Willem Dafoe, while he gives a great performance, also at the same line delivers lines that are kind of cartoony. Now, he's giving 110% when he delivers these lines that are cartoony, but at the same time, they're still cartoony. Now, that is how they were written, because the villains in the comics were written in the 60s, but by today's standards, it comes off as really silly. But it has great character arcs for our hero and villain, and helped lay the foundation for what we have today. Number 4, Spider-Man Homecoming. Spidey's first MCU outing, and it is a blast, though a bit flawed. It feels like it relies a bit too much on Tony Stark, but it feels like a high school movie from the 80s. It has a lot of fun with it. Number 3, Spider-Man 2. This is arguably one of the greatest sequels of all time. Superhero movie, regardless. Just one of the greatest sequels of all time, regardless of genre. It dials back some of the campier aspects of the first film and gives us one of the greatest, most complex villains in these movies in Dr. Octopus, and gives a great arc once again to Spider-Man and also Doc Ock. It also has a great twist ending with Peter and Harry's friendship now being destroyed, and Harry looking to avenge his father. However, it's unclear why Spider-Man loses his powers halfway through the film and then gets them back just as suddenly. That needed to be better explained. Number 2, Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. Each character in this movie is memorable and has a unique animation style. Spider-Ham is animated in the style of Looney Tunes, Penny Parker's anime, Miles is a classic comic book. Each character is memorable and unique, and it works well off each other. Miles also has a great character arc where, much like Peter before him, he gets spider powers and has to learn how to adjust to his new role in life. The story's fantastic, the animation's fantastic, everything about this movie is fantastic, and for a while it was my favorite Spider-Man movie. And then my number 1 pick came out, and obviously you can guess what that is. Number 1 is Spider-Man No Way Home. The payoff to 3 generations of Spider-Man films, and it is awesome. We finally get to see Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland interact with each other and work together. We get to see most of the villains from the previous Spider-Man films interact, and that works well. But it's not just the novelty that makes it number 1. I'm not putting it number 1 just because it's a novelty. No. Putting the novelty aside, it's still a great film. Peter from the MCU finally gets some personal growth and matures by the end of the film. He's no longer Iron Man Jr. like he was in Homecoming. He's no longer some random high school kid from Far From Home. He is now Spider-Man. He now has to deal with adult problems and goes through probably some of the heaviest stuff in this film. On top of that, Andrew Garfield finally gets some closure to his arc and what happened to Gwen. And we finally get a little bit of closure to Tobey Maguire. It's the ultimate payoff to all these films, so it comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share your ranking of the Spider-Man movies that you've seen, and I will see you next time.